episode 207 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 16th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. So friends, this past break, I did the thing that you're not supposed to do, which is check your email. And in this case, in my defense, I was checking my podcast email as opposed to work email, which is completely different. And checking podcast email over break is fun, especially when there was a name popped up in my inbox and I got so excited because Penny Walsh and I have been exchanging emails for quite some time. We also message on Twitter, and she is a school librarian in New Zealand. And we are very fortunate. We were able to record episode 93, New Zealand School Librarian, in October 2020. And in October 2021, a year later, she was part of the episode 145, round one, Can I Just Vent? Which was a really fun episode. It was a compilation of a bunch of librarians who are all just sort of releasing all of that pent up frustration. And it was a really sort of cathartic episode. It was really sort of fun. But Penny was part of both of those episodes, and she reached out to me over the break because she was also on break. And it was fun because we have these sort of conversations where we are half a world away and yet we're talking together at the same time, either on, this is to the credit of hashtag library Twitter and also on email. And she said, I've always had all these questions I'd love to ask you, meaning asking me. And she said, have you ever thought of doing an episode where the tables were turned and somebody was asking you the questions? And I thought it would be really fun. And I'll be honest, I haven't really, I've been interviewed a couple times, but it was for other people's podcasts, and I've never recorded that conversation for this podcast. But Penny was like, yeah, all these questions, it would be really fun to ask you. But, she said, in fairness, I'm not an American librarian, maybe I'm not the right person to do this. I'm like, oh, no, wait a minute. So Penny's been a friend of mine and a listener to the podcast, and she's been a guest on the podcast now. And I can't think of anybody better to ask these questions than somebody who's been part of this listening community and also recorded episodes. So I said, Penny, I think you need to do this. And what Penny would love to have is some help from listeners. And I asked permission to include her work email as well as her Twitter handle in our show notes. So friends, it would be fantastic. And I'll tell you, the one thing I said is I don't want to see the questions ahead of time. So I said, I am totally open for this idea. I think it'll be a fun way to turn the tables and I'll answer the questions and Penny will ask them. But if you would like to submit a question to be asked on this episode, again, I won't see them in advance. So there'll be that sort of a different dynamic. And it'll be fun because, help Penny put together the list of questions that she would like to ask in this episode, which will be recorded at some point this spring. Recording with New Zealand, poses its own challenges with that much of a time change. But again, Penny's contact information, and she's expecting you. She'd love to hear from listeners who also tune into the podcast. But her contact information is in the show notes, both her email and her Twitter handle. So I encourage you, if you've got some questions you would like to ask of the podcast, whether it's about me or the process or anything about the podcast, I encourage you to reach out to Penny. She's amazing. And then you too can have email in your email box from somebody in New Zealand. And on the topic of email, I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter, my handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now a word from our official sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I'm so excited to be working with them. And now in a segment I like to call Why I Love Capstone. Friends, in celebration of today's topic, which is STEM Librarian, we're going to feature Capstone resources which have a STEM twist. In this case, STEM Twisted Fairy Tales. And friends, there's a dedicated link in the show notes because there are 4 books in this set. And I thought it'd be sort of fun to feature books which tie in nicely with today's topic. I'll read from the website. Combine the charm and whimsy of fractured fairy tales with solid science content. And what do you get? The STEM Twisted Fairy Tale series, and a reader reaction that's equal parts giggles, wonder, and now I get it moments. Back matter features encourage further learning and discussion of key physics concepts. And friends, in this case, we've got informational text. These books are approximately 32 pages long. They are intended for a reading and interest level of grades, say, kindergarten to 3rd grade. And we've got 4 titles: Keep It Simple, Rapunzel, The Fairy Tale Physics of Simple Machines, Move On Up That Beanstalk, Jack, The Fairy Tale Physics of Forces and Motion, What's That Sound, Cinderella, The Fairy Tale Physics of Sound, and finally, What's the Matter with the 3 Little Pigs, The Fairy Tale Physics of Matter. And friends, again, this is sort of a fun way to sort of sneak in those STEM concepts, and then you would be able to tie them in nicely with your makerspace or the crafts that you've designed for the centers that you're going to be teaching that day. So friends, I encourage you to take a look at these books. What a creative way to tie in the lessons that you want to incorporate in your makerspace or in your STEM lessons with the storybook that you're reading that day. I am so grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 5. They're offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for our episode, STEM Librarian, and my conversation with Amanda Chacon. Friends, I am so excited. Amanda Chacon, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
You know, friends, I have been looking forward to this conversation. I've known about it since December, but we're sharing it today. Amanda, would you let us know, give us some idea of where you are in the country. Tell us about your current library, some of the programs you teach, and tell us, a little bit about the students you serve.
Okay, awesome. So currently I am an elementary school librarian in a district called Sheldon ISD, which is kind of nestled right next to Houston ISD. So I am in Houston, Texas, and my district is a Title I district, and my school is a Title I school. But we're rapidly growing. We just passed a big bond. We're going to get a bunch more schools. And so that's a great opportunity to expand all of our library programs that we do in Sheldon ISD. And I have been a middle school librarian, and I have taught high school English. So when I make my lessons and do my programs, I keep that in mind, that it can be adapted, across the levels, because I have experience with those levels.
Fantastic. And I love the idea that when a school district in Texas wants to expand, they literally just expand out. You look at metropolitan areas like in the Midwest. If we wanted to expand out, we'd be bumping into another district. And all of a sudden we'd be like, we can't build new buildings because there is no place to put them.
We have land here in Texas.
I'm so excited. I have many questions to ask you, and friends, we're in for a treat, but congratulations on being a 2022 Tall Texan. And for those who might be familiar and might not be familiar with this honor, would you give us some ideas of what all this entails?
Absolutely. So the Tall Texans Institute is run through the Texas Library Association, which is highly active in the state of Texas. And it's just a unique opportunity for a cohort to come together for a few days, relatively isolated on a resort. And we just kind of it's cool. And we just kind of explore how to be better leaders, not just necessarily in the library, but just in our professions and in our personal lives, because we all know it does kind of intermingle in education. And just ways that we can support each other in our leadership endeavors.
Well, and I can only imagine the kind of energy that you get in that cohort because it's in person and everybody there has, you've now taken school librarianship and put it on a pedestal that it deserves. And everybody there is on the same team and you all have very similar, characteristics in common, and to have that group together all working in the same direction. I know you can't even compare it to something like a staff meeting because or even a department meeting, because oftentimes we aren't all on the same page with our team. But that sounds amazing, friends. Of course, there's going to be links in the show notes. Another accolade which you recently earned is the Texas Association of School Librarians All-Star status for 2022, and yes, I've got the song going in my head, All Star. So friends, if you too want to have a little, little song going on while we have this conversation, there you go. But I know I'm not alone in wondering, how do you accomplish this?
Okay, so this is a relatively new program that TxASL, which is what we call Texas Association of School Librarians, has rolled out. And the purpose of it is to promote participation and engagement within the Texas library community, especially for new members. And what it is essentially a playlist of items. And you can kind of pick and choose what you want, and each thing is worth a certain number of points, and it's all geared to engage. So post in our community, write a blog post, be a guest on somebody's. Could
you be on a podcast?
You could be on a podcast. You could attend conferences. You could attend professional development, webinars, all kinds of stuff. So there's something for everybody there. If some people are more extroverted than others, some are more introverted. So regardless of what you're going to find some way to get those 10 points. And once you reach 10 points, then you become an all-star. And so that's something really cool to kind of add onto your evaluation and your social media and things like that. Okay, I'm actually on the badging committee for membership. And so I get to see everyone who's turned in their artifacts basically, and contact them for pictures, and I create the graphics and things like that. So I really get to see this frontline view of everything that Texas librarians are doing. And some people just go way above and beyond the 10 points. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks so cool. Maybe I can do that too.
Well, and I think what's important is you've given a goal. It's an arbitrary goal, but it's a wonderful goal because it requires that we invest in ourselves as professionals. It also gives us something to showcase to the people who value and evaluate us each year. So when you can turn around to your administration and start ticking off all the amazing things that you want to do to raise the profile of not only our space and the value we bring to the school, but also the value we bring to our profession. And have them, and then when I say them, I mean the administrators, realize that it's our professional organization encouraging us to do all these amazing things. I think it's a win-win.
Absolutely. And TxASL and TLA just in general it's a large community, but we're so tight-knit and supportive of one another. And there's always something to do, always something to learn. If you have a question, you can email just anybody on TLA and they'll respond. And it's just so supportive and wonderful. And I'm just very thankful to be a part of it.
Oh, absolutely. So friends, again, links in the show notes, because this is the kind of thing that would, forgive me, can be replicated in other places. And to see how successful it's been in the state of Texas, to know that this is something that other states and countries around the world could replicate to, again, raise the profile of what we do in our school communities. Friends, I always like to showcase something which stands out in our library websites. We're always looking to improve upon the websites that we build for our school. On the other hand, when it comes to Amanda, I really want to ask her about her professional website. And it's sort of like a digital portfolio on steroids. And for so many reasons, it makes all the sense in the world for school librarians to develop our own digital portfolio, even if we're not looking for a job. But can you give us some idea of what motivated you? Because clearly this is something that has to be maintained and has to be updated. It's not a one and done. So tell us what went into that.
Well, it kind of goes back to when we just talked about TxASL and the all-star status and everything like that. It's all about self-advocacy. And whenever I mentor new librarians, I'm always like, you really just got to advocate for yourself and for your program, especially on social media these days. And my website began as just kind of like an artifact repository for my end of the year evaluation. But then I was like, I bet some people can use some stuff on here. So I did go through. It was time consuming at first to go through and kind of hyperlink all of my artifacts, all of my presentations, lessons I've done, and things like that. But once I have done that, it's very easy now to go back in and just pop in, this lesson that I did or this article that I wrote. And so the initial setup might be a lot, but the payoff is enormous. So now at the end of the year, all I have to do is show my principal, hey, here you go. It has dates, it has artifacts you can look at, and, so on and so forth.
So friends, you and I benefit from this tremendously because when Amanda compiles all the amazing things that she's done, of course she is sharing it with us. So you're not going to want to miss our show notes today because of all the things that Amanda has so generously provided. There's an incredible folder in there of, in this case, we're talking about being a STEM librarian, but also you can see that portfolio that Amanda has put together and see how incredibly well it does to encapsulate all the amazing things that Amanda has done professionally. So I'm very grateful. Don't miss out on the show notes, friends. You are a certified NISE librarian. That is actually NISE, and I know we're going to hear about that organization in a minute. I know listeners would really like to know about the process that you did to become this certified STEM librarian.
Absolutely. And this was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. So our school district decided to go in the direction of compass schools, meaning some schools would focus on STEM, some would focus on fine arts, some would focus on technology and things of that nature. My school was chosen to be a STEM school. Now, this was just in its infancy. 2017 or so, and they asked a few of us, hey, would you be willing to go through this STEM certification, which is hosted through American College of Education, but it is the National Institute of STEM Education. And I was kind of the guinea pig for my campus, and I said absolutely, because that's a great opportunity and it didn't cost me anything. And so what it was, it took me about, I would say 6 months to 8 months to complete. There's 15 different competency-based domains that you have to go through. And it's not just reading an article and writing about it. It's really getting your hands in there. So it's like, how can we set up the environment in any classroom, in any library, in any part of the school to promote STEM education and that growth mindset? I actually had to go into different classrooms, observe, and see what elements of STEM are already just, seamlessly integrated into the lessons. And then what are some suggestions as to how we can kind of ramp up the STEM learning, the engineering design process within those classrooms. And then like the Capstone area was me designing my own lessons and performing those lessons and then having feedback from the students and the staff for that. Now, when you think STEM, obviously, science, technology, engineering, math was my Achilles heel because I'm not a math person at all. And I was a little terrified. I was like, how am I supposed to teach elementary kids how to promote math and stuff like that? But this program showed me that you don't have to be an expert in anything because the kids are going to be directing their own learning. They're going to be exploring what they're interested in. They're leading their own learning. And so it really helped me say, oh, I can actually do that. And of course, literacy in STEM was just hand in hand for me always. And it just helped bolster my skills in that area. So absolutely love it. That's how I became just an absolutely passionate about STEM in the library.
So I follow up because I know that somebody's going to look this up and wonder themselves, does the National Institute of STEM Education have a school librarian component, or is that the lens that you put on it as the educator and do everything in the context of being a school librarian?
That is a great question. They actually do not have any kind of focus area. So what you get for the 15 competency domains, no matter where you are in the school, you kind of tweak it to what you want. Okay. So we have principals undergoing STEM certification, instructional coaches. So people who aren't, necessarily in the classrooms every day, becoming STEM certified, and in that way they're able to become better leaders, not just on a STEM campus, but again with the learning process. Do you have a cohort? And clearly you're going to be doing a lot of this all in your own spaces at your own time. You said over a period of months. So yes. It would be curious to know if you could then connect with others in your cohort, but it sounds like it was self-paced, that you were doing yes. this on your own. It is self-paced. You do have a cohort and you have a contact person in case you have any questions. Because I was the first one on my campus to do it, I was kind of on my own. But after me, there was groups of teachers on my campus who would do it together, and then they would meet and just kind of, shoot ideas out to each other. So it can be it's collaborative as you want it to be. Well, and friends, you can be sure we're going to be sharing Amanda's social media at the end of the show. And if you have any questions about becoming certified yourself, I have a fairly good feeling that Amanda's going to get back to you with lots of ideas about how you can get through this certification yourself. Something I noticed about all your micro-credentialing, it's fair to say that as a STEM librarian, investing in the platforms and earning those different badges, those designations, is not only recommended, but it's a natural part of being a STEM librarian. Absolutely. And you'll kind of notice as I became STEM certified, my micro-credentials increased because I got more exposure. I became more comfortable, more confident with whatever resources I was using. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. So for Ozobots, I was using Ozobots in my library centers. So it's just kind of surface level in a way, but I was like, I know there has to be more to do with these Ozobots. So of course I went onto their website. They have amazing lesson plans that you can access. It's not always necessarily something that I could use. So I was like, what is a way that I can become more familiar with Ozobots and Ozobots as learning tools while also getting a certification? And then that was the Ozobot Educator Certification, which was actually one of the hardest certifications I got. Really? Because yes, you have quite a few, and so this one was work. It was a lot, but there's two people in charge of the certification process, and they were just immensely helpful. And they also will invite you on, like, Ozobot regularly hosts free professional development webinars. And I, even if I'm not an English teacher, I found stuff from it that I could use, math teacher and so on, because it's all about how Ozobots are being used globally. And then I can take and pick from that and say, oh my gosh, that would be perfect for the library, like for Balloons Over Broadway. We use the Ozobots to code a parade around a city block. I made a city block out of butcher paper and Lego bricks, and then they decorated little balloons and taped them to the Ozobots, and we had a parade. It was super cute. Aww. That's wonderful. Yeah. Well, and I think it sounds like when a platform wants to offer a credential for teachers, it sounds like this is they want everybody to succeed. This is a process. This isn't a barrier. This is supposed to be a way that teachers and educators like ourselves can invest the time and the energy. It's not a rubber stamp, but it does require that you put some time into learning the device that you're using or the platform that you're using, and do so in a way that's constructive to your immediate surroundings and what you're going to use with your students. Absolutely. Another one is the Lego Education Ambassador, which used to be called Lego Master Teachers. And I've been wanting that for years because I'm a huge Lego nerd. And it's like, okay, you can give the kids a box of Legos and maybe some STEM challenge cards, but what are some ways that we can kind of kick it up a notch and really make them kind of go through the engineering design process with Lego bricks? And so I explored the Lego certification, educator certification, and I was like, I really want this. So I did, and I got it. And then a month later, COVID happened. So I wasn't able to necessarily perform all of my educator duties. But then I was able to reapply and become accepted the next year. And what I love about the Lego education community, it is like immensely supportive. And you can just email anybody. They'll respond right back to you. You get like advanced notice of things that are coming up in Lego, in the Lego world. And then you could just share ideas. Hey, I'm in the library. I'm in the science classroom. I'm in the math classroom. I'm not even in a school. I'm just a consultant. There's all sorts of people in this cohort. And I just absolutely love the networking aspect of it too.
It's something that I noticed, and I'm not certified in anything, but when you put out an all call to your families that you need and would be readily accepting donations of Lego, you'd be surprised how many people come out of the woodwork to donate something that has, been well used, loved, but taken apart. And oftentimes for our students, once they have dismantled whatever it is that Lego set was meant to make, the interest, unfortunately, wanes, and parents are left with all of these bins of unassigned Legos because they are no longer in the configuration, that one thing that the students and their children wanted to build. But they're happy to turn them over to the school. I mean, I've noticed, at least in my experience, that families are like, oh my God, please take these off my hands.
Yes. I actually have a little secret weapon for you and your listeners, if you will, because this was an issue for me, is getting, they're expensive. Getting Lego bricks, getting magnetiles, getting any kind of materials for a makerspace. Facebook mom groups. They are constantly cleaning out their playrooms and their kids' closets. And I just put out, hey, I'm a school librarian. If anyone has anything that I could use in the library, and I give some examples. And I mean, they're just like, come and get it. And it's just a great resource. And it doesn't have to, I use my neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods. So just like Google that and start putting out mom groups. Well, and not to be gendered, but it really is mom groups. I hate to say it, but the same is true here in Michigan, that if you ask a Facebook group of people to donate toys, you're going to probably get a bunch of enthusiastic moms who are like, oh my gosh, absolutely. Yes.
I love that. Noticed about you is that you write and you receive many grants. And I appreciate that makerspace items are not always included in what we consider a traditional budget. And many STEM projects include consumables, meaning that eventually you're going to run out of the supplies that you use to do whatever it is you're doing in your makerspace. So it seems like you have a knack for writing these grants and then getting them so that you have that extra budget to fund your makerspace. What advice can you give to our listeners who are tuning in?
Writing grants at first was not easy for me because most grants have all of these specific parameters that you have to work within, and you have to use so many characters and words, and I can be a little bit wordy. But the way I approach it is the worst they can say is no, and then you are still in the same place you were before, and you already have a grant written that you can kind of adapt and tweak for other grants. So that's kind of what I do. I focus in on a need in my library, and one of my pet projects for the last couple of years is increasing the amount of diverse holdings in my collection. And so I'm like, here's some statistics of what I want now. Here's where I want them to be. Here's why. Because we all know libraries are not just reflections, mirrors, but they're also windows. So we don't want just like books about one thing. And I kind of paint a picture for them. And then I run my grant through at least 2 other people. And I say, please read it. let me know if any wording is awkward, and let me know if I'm forgetting anything in the grant. Because if I'm getting a lot of Lego materials or Magna-Tiles, which I just got some Magna-Tiles, you have to think about storage, because they're not going to necessarily fit within the box they came in. Lego might, but the Magna-Tiles don't. So think about storage, think about batteries, all those little extra things. And I just kind of, if I'm running out of ideas, like my district does something every year, and most districts I know have some kind of foundation where they give grants to teachers. And I always encourage everyone to just go for it. Because again, what's the worst they can do is say no. And my district makes this big celebration about it when you win, and you get this huge check, and it's really fun. But then you also get these materials, and I try to choose materials that I can use every year. But you're right, sometimes you can't use them every year, depending on the lesson. And so all you have to do is just really paint that picture. If that grant committee person is sitting in your classroom and you have the materials you requested, what are they? What are the kids doing with them? What are they talking about as they're working with these materials? What are the conversations that are being had? And then what are some of the end objectives that you're hoping? Like for me, it was to increase the percentage of diverse holdings for my most recent grant.
Wow. A couple things. First of all, when you receive that grant and you have all those photo ops, yes, do make sure you get a picture with your administrator, because they love it. You've got to make sure you've got that picture with your principal, who may or may not have had anything to do with that grant. But boy, when we make them look good, that is always going to be a win on your evaluation. Another thing, when you mentioned foundation, I learned that on our foundation, because every district I've ever worked for, this is it's a foundation, and it is a sort of outside of the district, but works to benefit all the needs that may come up during the school year. But I found out we had a retired school librarian on our foundation board. I was like,
there you go.
All of a sudden, I just realized that bar for entry, like that when I write a request to the foundation, there is at least one person on that board who knows exactly what I'm talking about and the needs. Because I think when it comes to requesting things for Makerspace, it is too easy for somebody who does not understand STEM and does not understand Makerspace for them to see the cardboard and the Legos and just say they're just playing. And they don't see the larger implications around the skills that are being brought forward when our students get engaged in a makerspace.
That brings up an excellent point. So my last grant that I wrote was for a Lego Leaders Club. And it's called Learning Through Lego Play. And the whole point of it was purposeful play. And there's all kinds of research out there. So what I did was I brought in some of the research when I wrote the grant that bolstered, hey, they're not just playing. This is purposeful play. They are learning the engineering design process. They are becoming innovative. They are, in some instances, creating prototypes of real-world solutions and becoming engineers. So absolutely purposeful play.
One of our children is an engineering student in college and is doing a student internship. And it is curious because so many of the skills that he's using as a student intern were fostered in school, working with 3D printers and working on teams and working with other students. And I'll even brag one more thing, as a stage manager for his school plays. So, tying in those people skills, but also working on these skills when you're a student in K-12 schools, all of a sudden become hugely important as college students when you're trying to establish who you want to be professionally. So I love that. It all all has to start somewhere, right? And your high school kids are not going to work well in groups if they didn't have an opportunity to do that as elementary students. I'm thinking about some of those kids who grow up, in say an only child situation where sharing is not a big deal. And this is where we need to encourage those kinds of behaviors in school, because working as a team is always going to be a valuable skill. I have to ask you, because last week's episode was about elementary genreification. You have a STEM genre label for your books in your collection. I love this. I saw this, friends. You've got to dig into the show notes, because when I saw that, it was just one picture, and I looked, I was like, oh, there's a STEM label for your collection. Would you share with listeners, what have you done to promote your STEM titles, both with your students and with your staff, with your teachers?
Okay, obviously this is fun for librarians. Yes, so like I said, when we became officially a STEM school, I was like, well, kids aren't necessarily going to know which books to veer towards if they're interested in that kind of stuff. So I created this section in my library. I took some of the bookshelves out. I put some contact paper on it, some lights around it, and then I made the genre label. I just made it in the Avery template, copied it, cut it out, put it on the book. Of course, any book really can be considered STEM. So what I did was kind of see what my students what my students were interested in, and promoted those particular books. And also books that are being promoted on STEM websites and things of that nature. Put that STEM label on it, displayed in that section. It is a rotating section, so once those books are done, they go to the general catalog, but they still have those labels on it. So if kids come to me and say, I really want a STEM book, well, here's my special section, but if you don't find anything, look for books with this particular genre label on it. And they love it. Teachers love it too. So I've done some different things to promote books to teachers. One of my favorite things, though, was the sip and see. And so, sometimes new books are babies. And so I got a bunch of new books in that were mostly STEM oriented. And I set it up in the teacher lounge with tablecloths and just some 2-liter sodas and stuff, and promoting the books. Had a little clipboard where they could write just a barcode down, so it didn't bother them too much. But it was like, sip and see, come meet our newest STEM offerings and see how they can be used in your classroom. Even if it's just displaying them on the chalkboard, or whiteboard now, which most of them just do, or having it in their classroom libraries. I'm like, please take these books, use them, have them available for the students, because that's the whole point.
Well, and I know librarians sometimes have utilized those little corners where you have where the refrigerator and the microwave is for the staff members, or this is in the copy room, or this is the print center where teachers can go and get their work done. And so I think it's just opportunistic, because you sort of take that satellite collection and you move it. You take rather than overwhelming your teachers, or, by the way, requiring them to come to the library, which, for some people, depending on the size of your school, this may not be on their regular route. But if you put the library in the space where they are and say, I thought you might take, and by the way, you don't even have to tell me anything. Just write down the barcode and you can take this. It's like a grab and go. But I had such a giggle when I saw that in the show notes, because the last time I heard sip and see, it was for when a baby's born.
I know. Well, these are different kinds of babies being born.
Yes. I mean, it's the same concept, right? This is a new arrival.
Yes.
This is a new arrival, and I'm going to ply you with baked goods or a beverage, and you can sit here, turn the pages, and you know what? You've taken that barrier for entry and literally just put it where the teachers are going to see this most likely. And I think that, it's an important reminder to the teachers that we are investing in them, their programs, and we're here to support them. And sometimes they don't even expect it, but you're like, oh, wait. You hadn't mentioned anything, but now I think I want to do something with the librarian, and I have this invitation, this opportunity. So what a wonderful strategy. One of your fantastic resources shared in our show notes includes Storybook STEM. And it might mean something to some people, but to others, would you let us know, let listeners know, what kinds of lessons did you include in our show notes, and how did this all come about?
Well, Storybook STEM came about through my usage of library centers. So I used to be in a fixed schedule, meaning they would be dropped off by themselves. The teacher would go take a conference, and I would have about 50 minutes with them. It was too chaotic, really, to have, obviously, 30, well, at this time, we had 900 kids in our school. So I had about 40 kids per class. It was insane. I survived, but I didn't want them all just rushing out to check out. So we did centers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And once we got comfortable with that, I'm like, I'm going to tie these in to what we're reading. So if we read Creepy Carrots, then they would kind of have a choice board, depending on the center they had, of things they could do related to Creepy Carrots. So they could, with Lego, build a fence, like in Creepy Carrots, and I had these little stuffed carrots. It was really cute. They could even draw if they had that center to draw into color, replicate a scene or create a scene of what you think is going to happen next. And it just kind of goes from there. So then I was like, let me start doing this a little more, and also let me advocate more, because nobody really knew I was doing it. Once my principal saw it, she was like, this is cool. And she wanted more time for that. So I became on a flex schedule, and now I know. I can hear you being excited.
Friends, that is such a win. Something that as somebody who was on a fixed schedule for 14 years, the idea of convincing somebody that my program is more valuable if it's a flexible schedule, yes. That is something which it's very rare to hear people be the reason why the administration had a change of heart or reimagined your schedule, because that is something that you've achieved, and that's a huge win.
I have a wonderful principal. I mean, obviously. And she just really wanted to support me when she saw the Storybook STEM in action. And so what it is we pair a text with STEM challenges. And I just kind of mix it up. I see what people are doing out there globally, and I adapt it for my timing, my resources, my kids, what they're interested in. And so we all read the book together, and then I have different levels of STEM challenges. And we start off kind of, easy, because we want everyone to succeed and get confidence. So, for instance, it could be something very basic like build the wall, build the scene, and I'll give you some examples here in a sec. And then step 2, okay, now build something that's not in the story, like a transport device. And then step 3 is test it out, make sure it works, and then adapt if it doesn't. And so one thing that we recently did actually is with The Princess and the Warrior by Duncan Tenatia, because I love to support classroom teachers with what I'm doing as well. And most of them were on fairy and folktales at that point. So this one is amazing if you haven't read it, by the way. And students were tasked with the first thing, using Lego bricks, replicating Aztec patterns. And even just that, we really just kind of started deep diving into that, because I had printed out different Aztec patterns for them to look at. And there's some in the book as well. And so they had to figure out, if it's a circular thing, how do you make it circular with rectangle and square bricks? So that was a challenge for them. And then once they pass that test, they get a sticker, if you will. Everyone loves stickers. They go to challenge 2, which is, okay, in the story, the messenger, I don't want to spoil it for everybody, but the messenger went to the princess, and that was a turning point in the story. So I said, build something that will block the messenger from reaching the princess, basically saving the princess. So then they started going crazy with ideas, and that's what I love to see. There was, lava fields and catapults being built. It was just so cool, and I had these little Lego figures that they would use as the princess and the messenger. And then once they did that, and they were successful, they're like, okay, what's next? And I wasn't ready for that, so I just kind of okay, step 3, build a scene from this particular page where they the Aztecs, their buildings were very triangular, stepped up in shape, and it's a unique design. So I'm like, build something like that so that the princess can have this particular place to now live out her happy life. And so they went from there.
I love, like, that's like the whole, like breaking it down like that and showing us step by step. And by the way, the kids will ask questions that you're not prepared to answer. And that happens all the time.
They actually ask, and this is so funny you mention this, because in the story, it's basically a folklore about these two volcanoes that do exist in Mexico. One of them is dormant and one of them is active, and they are together. It's kind of like a love story between them. And they're like, are these real volcanoes? And I'm like, of course they are. And they're like, well, can we see them? So I'm like, okay. And we pulled up Google Earth. I don't really know how to use Google Earth all that well. So I typed in the volcano. It took us there, and they're like, can we see it like we're there? And they taught me how to just press on the person and drop them in there. And we actually went into the volcano, both the dormant one and the active one. And so we were all learning together, and they were so excited. And then the science teacher came in, and we started talking about what makes it active, what makes it dormant. And you could see the smoke coming out of the active one just live on Google Earth. It was just like chills learning that. So that went a direction I wasn't expecting, but I love that because the kids will tell you, this isn't working, or this is awesome. What else can we do?
I think that's amazing because you have to create that culture, right? You have to create that culture where the students are comfortable, not only making suggestions, but having a sense that it's okay. I'm in a place where I can say the things I want to learn, and that's going to be warmly received. And it was such a meaningful learning experience because not because you had planned it, forgive me, but you had set the stage for students to expound and sort of branch off and go on those tangents, which are all relatable, all educational. But the fact that you hadn't conceived of that from start to finish is fantastic because you got to go on this ride as well. And it's going to change how you do things moving forward. But it also allows you to recognize being the person in charge does not mean you have complete control over where this is going.
No, I know these kids are better than me. They're more creative than me. I absolutely know that. Another thing that we've done a few years ago, but we're going to do it recently, is with After the Fall by Dan Zintat. You know, yes, that's an amazing book. And so I'm going to do this with the younger ones first, and we're going to create origami airplanes because in the book that becomes his hobby. But I was like, we're not just going to do that. We're going to decorate these airplanes with our fears. And then we're going to have airplane throwing contests. We're going to literally throw away our fears. And obviously they love it because they can throw airplanes in the library, but it becomes very meaningful for them too. I actually had some parents contact my principal saying my kid was really afraid of the dark, or I can't remember the other example. And this actually helped him. And so we've been doing it at home. And I just thought, I didn't expect that. I thought that was super cool. The older ones are going to create a wall for Humpty Dumpty, and Humpty Dumpty is an Easter egg with a rock in it to make it harder for them. And then they're going to have to think of a way to get him safely up and down the wall without breaking. So that's going to be what's coming up within the next month.
Wow. You know, I could talk about this forever. And I know that now we've got some librarians right now who are just taking notes. And if I'm not mistaken, your school's behavior incentive program has opportunities for your students to use the makerspace. Would you let us know about Colt Cash?
Yes. So we are the Carroll Colts. And so our PBIS incentive is they can earn Colt Cash for behaviors going above and beyond what the expectation is. And they save the Colt Cash, and then they can cash it in for certain prizes. And prizes have different prices. It can go from like $10 Colt Cash all the way, I'm the most expensive, to $80 Colt Cash. And then once they do that, they can spend an hour in the makerspace with a friend. They can bring a friend, So some of them go in halfsies and just kind of do whatever they want in there. They can use the consumables and non-consumables. And what I love about the program is that it not only teaches them how to save money, how to calculate, oh, I only need 15 more to reach this goal of mine, but it also gives kids more access to my actual makerspace section in the back of the library as opposed to just centers.
Wow. I can see that would motivate certain students. That's what they want to do. And that's where how they're going to direct their motivation, because this is what they want to have, that sort of freedom to explore. Something I notice also is I love whenever our show notes include photos because it inspires other questions. But tell us about the STEM Challenge Wheel.
So this came about because when I was doing centers, the centers do rotate. They can be magnetic tiles, Lego bricks, Kiva planks. There's a coloring center, jewelry making center. Just kind of want to reach everybody. But I didn't want them to just okay, I have this. Now what do I do with it? So I have STEM challenge cards, different themes posted on my whiteboard. But then I was like, let's add a little dynamic element to it. I saw a teacher using this IKEA wheel, and I'm not going to pronounce it for you because I can't. It's an IKEA name. And do you know how to say it, Amy?
No, not even. It's just from IKEA, and we included the link in the show notes.
Exactly. She was using it for incentive rewards in her classroom. And I was like, oh no, wouldn't it be cool if I could put some STEM challenges on it? So I went to IKEA. That was a great excuse to go to IKEA. Bought the wheel. I think it was $20. And I downloaded this template from Teachers Pay Teachers, and I was able to put my own STEM challenges on it. And I tried to use kind of broader ones that could be applied to anything that they have, whether it's Kiva planks, straws and connectors, whatever, like build a flower, design a playground, build a pet. And they love that whole dynamic aspect of spinning the wheel versus just flipping through STEM cards.
Wow. It's fun because it's no tech. I think every once in a while people assume that STEM means we have to be involved with a great deal of machines and expensive, and it gives me an idea of some of the no tech that you have in your makerspace and some of the low tech that you have in your makerspace, because I think that sometimes is just a barrier for us when we're trying to conceptualize the things that we want to offer to the students we support and serve. You mentioned some of your clubs, and I love that when we create clubs that are specific to the physical space that we provide for our school community. Can you tell us about the STEM clubs you offer? I'd love to hear about the STEM Gems, because this is a new one for me.
Well, STEM Gems was created, and it's interesting you mentioned low tech, because the whole point of STEM Gems is to be a safe space for girls to explore STEM concepts in a risk-taking, supportive environment. And the whole thing is and it's on our application, we do no tech, low tech, high tech. And so they're going to get experience within all of those. I do partner with the University of Purdue GEMS program, but I write my own curriculum. I just kind of use them. I love their handbook. If you're not even sure where to start, on their website, they have a GEMS handbook. And it even has forms for you that you can adapt. Like if I want my kids to join, rules for the club, norms for the club. It even has example experiments you can do. So we meet, I usually tend to ask the older girls, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, to join the club. It's extremely popular. So there is a process of application. And we do projects. I just kind of think about what would I think that they would be interested in, and then I kind of make a project for it. So some of the most successful ones have been guest speakers that are women in these STEM fields. Like a woman firefighter came, and she brought her gear, and they got to try on her gear, and it was adorable. And then we also had a woman who works at NASA, and she was one of the ones who does schedules for the people on the ISS, the astronauts on the ISS. Like she talks about how she makes their schedule, and it was just fascinating for me. And then we've done different projects. So one notable one that does kind of tie in all of the technologies and no tech is Save a Stuffy. So,
friends, the photos, this is so adorable. And can I just say, I love that anytime you create a club and your school is going to want you to document, and it sounds like this is, in this respect, it's Purdue University is going to provide some of the materials that would help facilitate an application so you could provide this club to your students, and make it just easier as a sponsor. Because as a sponsor of a club, it's going to require a certain amount of effort on your part, not just your time, but your effort. But yes, the photos of the stuffed animals, please tell me all about this project, because it was adorable. And I have to imagine, as a parent of children who has this collection of stuffed animals, I see that this probably didn't require a great deal of resourcing, because the students provided their own patients.
Oh, this actually goes back to Facebook mom groups, because I posted, well, first of all, I read a book. It was called Carl's New Beak. And it's about the eagle.
I have that book.
Yes. They 3D print a new beak for him. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool to have like some kind of prosthetic challenge? And so, because that's real world application. So I started Googling around. I found some stuff, but I adapted it to our kids and our resources. And I asked around and I said, do you have any stuffed animals you're willing to get rid of? And if it's okay that they are mutilated a little bit, missing, an arm. I spent the summer cutting off ears and eyes and stuff like that. Yes. And noses. And so the girls were introduced to this whole concept. We watched some videos about 3D printing prosthetics and just the real world applications of this. And then they adopted an animal and they were going to create a prosthetic for it. So then that brought in, okay, you have to plan a prototype for this prosthetic. A lot of measuring was involved, which was a big math thing. Again, the girls took most of the control over that. I was just like, it looks good. And we transferred that into Tinkercad. So then we had to teach them Tinkercad and how to create the prosthetic, had to be the right size. And then we printed them on a 3D printer. So it was just this whole, they were the most excited I've ever seen them. And then we had to talk about how are you going to attach the prosthetic to the animal? Like you can't just set it there. So how are you going to attach it? Because, prosthetics can come on and off sometimes. And so they had to think about using makerspace materials to do that. And again, there's, like you said, there's pictures on my website. I also have a STEM Gems website that goes into some of the curriculum that I use.
The idea of having to mutilate something so kids can fix it is so twisted.
It is.
And yet I think it becomes more authentic, because if the students had a pristine toy that they then had to ruin to fix, it changes everything. But you've given them something that already has a problem, which is, forgive me, a more authentic type of exercise,
yes.
Because they can't, yes, it's a little more authentic. So I think that's fantastic. Can you share with listeners some other student clubs you've done? I know you've mentioned Lego Leaders, but I'd love to know more.
Okay, so Lego Leaders is actually something new for me that I am starting. I wrote a grant for the materials, so I've been organizing the materials. It's going to be a cohort of students, and we're using challenges from the Lego Education website that give them real-world problems, and they have to create prototypes using Lego. So for instance, the first kinds of things we're going to do is just kind of ease them into it, right? Because I'm all about scaffolding. It's just, okay, this Lego figure lives in an area with a lot of tornadoes. Can we build a safe habitat for this animal? Some of them are going to get animals. It just depends on my materials. And then we're going to build up to the Lego Education's Build to Launch series, which has about 8 challenges that go from ground to Mars, focusing on Artemis, NASA's Artemis. So, we're going to watch the launch that finally happened. And we're going to talk about, okay, what did it take to get them there? what happens when they're in space? And then once they're on Mars, what can we use to get them around, to make them safe, and so on? And LEGO Education does a wonderful job of providing videos of actual astronauts and people who build all of these things. So we're going to use that to help scaffold them into their prototypes. So I'm super excited about this club. So watch, I have a website for it, LEGO Leaders. So keep in my social media, keep an eye out, because of course I'm going to take a lot of pictures and videos.
Oh, my goodness. I'm so grateful you took some time out of your busy Saturday to join me. You know, we are in the very early days of 2023, to be exact, January 7th, right?
Yes.
So I'd love to know what goals you have for your program. It sounds like you're already, involved in a lot of things, but I'm sure that at the beginning of the year, you're sort of looking ahead. Would you mind sharing with us some things that you'd like to work towards?
Absolutely. So after I do a club or a storybook STEM lesson, I do have a quick Google form for students and staff to fill out where they give me feedback. How engaged were you? What kinds of things would you like to see in the future? And so I'm compiling the teacher feedback now, and I'm going to use that to kind of gear ahead, because I always want to support the teachers too, what they're learning in the classroom, gaps they may see in their students' learning that we can kind of address in the library. So I want to do more of that. I want to do more of bringing that in. And then I also want to do more outreach as well. Just like, here's what's going on in my library, yes, with my kids, but let's hear what your library is like and how, if you want to implement any of these programs, we can tweak it for you. Just more outreach and advocacy.
Oh, I'm so excited to see what comes of this episode. I really am. What advice would you give to librarians like me who would hope to replicate some of the fantastic things you're doing in your school?
Okay, well, first of all, this didn't come about just perfectly, seamlessly. I made mistakes. And I always ask the kids what could have been done a little bit more smoothly. Always ask for student input. What else would you like to see? But I always just start small. Like, I started with a few centers, and then I built it up. And then once we were comfortable with centers, then I added on that storybook STEM element. And then don't be afraid to ask people for things. So many people are afraid to be rejected, but okay, then again, you're just where you were before. So I ask community members to come in and talk to our kids, read a book even. I ask stuff for grants. I'm just always asking for stuff for our kids. And I think you just got to you can't be afraid to get yourself out there and advocate for libraries and programming that libraries do.
Well, and I think like so much of what we want for our spaces and our collections and our programs takes time. And we have to recognize that this isn't going to happen overnight. And everything that you've been describing represents a great deal of your profession in the last couple of years.
Yes.
Amanda, I am so grateful you have so generously shared of all the things that you're doing. It sounds absolutely inspiring, and I know a lot of listeners are getting some great ideas. Please share with us where we can find you on social media, because I know a lot of listeners would like to include you in their virtual PLN.
Absolutely. So you can find me on Twitter at TheGoodRead and Instagram at STEMLib. And then Amy's going to link you to my portfolio website, STEM Gems, and LEGO Leaders websites, in case you want to take a look at those. And of course, I'm always available if you want to DM me, email me, say, hey, I have this idea. You have any tips for me? That's what I'm here for. I love networking with other librarians. That's where I get my best resources. So absolutely.
Amanda, thank you so much. Happy New Year. And I wish for you a wonderful rest of the school year. It sounds like you've got some wonderful things planned.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
Friends, you're not going to want to miss the show notes, which Amanda so generously put together, because whether you have a makerspace and you are well established as a STEM librarian, or if you're just dabbling and thinking about possibly pursuing a certificate, this is a great opportunity to learn from another person who has been very invested in becoming a STEM librarian. Friends, I hope you consider sending a few questions to Penny Walsh, who is going to be compiling them for an episode that she and I will be recording in the future. And you can find her contact information in the show notes. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. Consider sending a little fan mail to Amanda, because I know that she would love to hear from you, and especially if there's something that she talked about that you're excited to implement in your program. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. One last friendly reminder, friends, I encourage you to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more using the code UNITED. The topic of our next episode will be empowering elementary students and my conversation with Ben Court. I hope you will tune in.